They said Anthony Madison didn't have a heart, not because he was cruel but because nothing in the world could distract him. Not love, not pleasure, not women, not even loneliness. At exactly 5:30 a.m., Chicago was still half asleep when Anthony Madison stood in front of the glass walls of his penthouse, adjusting his cufflinks while the city glowed beneath him like a kingdom waiting for orders. 30 years old, billionaire CEO, owner of Madison Global Holdings. His life was ruled by time. Every second mattered, every move calculated, every emotion locked away. Anthony didn't wake up to alarms, he woke up to discipline. He didn't eat breakfast, he fueled his body. He didn't go to work, he commanded an empire. Inside his penthouse, everything reflected control. Marble floors cold beneath his bare feet, black leather sofas untouched by comfort, books arranged by purpose, not decoration. Even the silence obeyed him. Anthony slipped into his tailored suit, dark as midnight, his golden brown eyes sharp with intelligence and restrained anger. He checked his watch. 5:42 a.m., late by his standards, and Anthony Madison hated being late even to himself. By the time his driver arrived downstairs, Anthony was already descending the private elevator, briefcase in hand, mind racing through numbers, mergers, global markets, not people, not emotions, not love. To Anthony, relationships were liabilities, marriage was weakness, and romance? A waste of time. What he didn't know was that his perfectly ordered life was already being quietly disturbed, not by love, but by patience in disguise. Madison Tower rose above Chicago like a monument of power, 60 floors of glass, steel, and intimidation. The moment Anthony Madison stepped inside, conversations died. Employees straightened their backs. Assistants checked schedules twice. Managers whispered instead of speaking, not because he was cruel, but because Anthony Madison demanded excellence the way kings demanded loyalty. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor as he walked through the lobby, his presence heavier than sound itself. The security team nodded respectfully. The receptionist froze for half a second before greeting him. Anthony didn't respond. He didn't need to. Inside the executive floor, meetings started before he arrived because everyone feared wasting even one of his seconds. Anthony entered the boardroom, placed his briefcase down slowly, and lifted his eyes. "Let's begin," he said calmly. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Graphs filled the screen, profits, losses, investments, acquisitions. Anthony listened without blinking, his mind slicing through data faster than machines. When someone stuttered, he corrected them. When someone lied, he exposed them politely. When someone hesitated, he dismissed them silently. To Anthony, people were resources, and resources had to perform. Then, a soft, confident voice interrupted the atmosphere. "Your European branch is leaking funds through logistics, Anthony." Everyone turned. Chloe, daughter of his mother's closest friend, executive assistant by privilege, not merit, beautiful, sharp-tongued, manipulative in the most elegant way. She leaned against the glass wall, long hair resting smoothly on her shoulders, lips curved with confidence she hadn't earned. Anthony slowly lifted his eyes, looked at her once, then ignored her completely. He returned to the screen like she never existed. The room held its breath. Chloe smiled faintly, unfazed. She liked challenges, and Anthony Madison was the greatest challenge she had ever met. But to Anthony, she was nothing more than noise he couldn't mute. Not because he wanted her, but because his mother had forced a promise out of him. Don't sack Chloe, ever. And Anthony Madison never broke promises, even the ones he hated. Anthony's penthouse stayed silent long after midnight. The kind of silence money buys. The kind that swallows noise, emotion, and weakness. He stood by the window again. Jacket off now, sleeves rolled slightly, city lights stretching endlessly beneath him. His phone vibrated once more. "Mother." This time, he answered. "Anthony." Her calm but worried voice flowed through the speaker. "You're still at work, aren't you?" "Yes." A pause. "You always are." Anthony closed his eyes briefly. His mother had raised him after his father died early, taught him discipline before tenderness, ambition before affection. She had created the man he was, and now feared the consequences of her own teachings. You need a life outside your company, she continued gently. You're 30, you run half the city, but you don't live in it. Anthony's jaw tightened. Living doesn't pay salaries, she sighed softly. Love does something money can't. Anthony didn't reply. She changed tone. Tomorrow night, another dinner. Please don't walk out this time. Silence again. I'll attend, he said finally, not out of desire but respect. After the call, Anthony placed the phone down slowly. Love, the word felt foreign. In college, girls admired him. In business, women chased him. In society, families begged for him. But Anthony Madison had never chased anyone. He had chased deadlines, markets, empires, and in doing so, he had learned how to control everything except whatever people called happiness. Across the office floor, Chloe was still there, typing slowly, pretending not to notice him watching the reflection in the glass. She always stayed later than necessary, not because of work, but because proximity felt like progress to her. Anthony turned away from the window, poured another drink, and returned to his desk. Tomorrow would bring numbers, meetings, pressure, and another forced attempt at something he didn't believe in. Morning returned faster than Anthony expected. By 6 o'clock a.m., Madison Tower already breathed with quiet preparation. Anthony entered like always precise steps, neutral face, eyes already calculating the day ahead. But today, something different waited near his office door. Lucas, his only real friend. They met in college. Two ambitious minds, one disciplined like steel, the other reckless like fire. While others feared Anthony, Lucas treated him like a human being, something rare and dangerous. Lucas leaned casually against the wall, coffee in hand, expensive jacket thrown lazily over his shoulder. You look like you slept with spreadsheets again, Lucas teased. Anthony paused. Why are you here this early? Lucas grinned. Missed you. Anthony walked past him. Impossible. Lucas followed inside, uninvited. Your mom called me. Anthony stopped, slowly turned. About? Marriage, love, blind dates. Your emotional bankruptcy. Anthony exhaled sharply. She's recruiting now? Lucas laughed, sitting on the edge of his desk. She's worried. Everyone is. You run companies like wars, Anthony, but relationships aren't markets. Anthony straightened his cuff. I'm not buying anyone. Lucas tilted his head. That's the problem. You don't even try. Just then, Chloe entered quietly with files in her hands, heels clicking lightly against the marble floor. Her eyes flicked at Lucas with mild annoyance, then back to Anthony with calculated calm. Your schedule for today, she said, sliding the tablet across his desk. Anthony didn't look at her face, only the screen. Reschedule the afternoon board call, he said coldly. Chloe smiled faintly. Already done. Lucas watched the exchange, amused. She's efficient, he murmured. Anthony replied flatly, she's persistent. Chloe pretended not to hear, but her fingers tightened briefly on the folder she held. Lucas noticed, and smiled to himself, because tension, when ignored long enough, always finds a way to speak. Anthony Madison didn't believe in weak mornings. Before the sun rose fully over Chicago, he was already inside the private gym attached to his penthouse, a silent temple of steel and mirrors. The treadmill hummed under his feet as sweat traced slow lines down his sharp jaw. His breathing was steady, controlled, like everything else in his life. Every punch he threw at the heavy bag carried something more than strength, restraint, anger, pressure, expectation. Anthony trained not for beauty, but for control. His mind replayed board meetings, contracts, and unfinished conversations. His mother's voice echoed softly in his memory. "You need a life outside your company." He scoffed inwardly. What people called life often destroyed discipline. The bag swung back violently as Anthony struck again, knuckles burning through the gloves. Mirrors reflected a man carved by ambition, broad shoulders, disciplined posture, eyes that rarely softened. To the world, Anthony Madison was untouchable, but alone, surrounded by steel and silence. He was a man trying to outrun something invisible, the emptiness that followed power when no one was allowed close enough to fill it. After an hour, he stopped, not exhausted, just finished. He wiped his face, changed into another perfectly pressed suit, and prepared to return to his empire as if nothing human had ever crossed his mind. By mid-morning, Madison Tower vibrated with pressure. Executives filled the conference room, laptops glowing, charts prepared, tension visible behind forced smiles. Anthony entered last, as always, not because he was late but because his arrival changed the atmosphere. He placed his folder on the table slowly and lifted his eyes. "Start," he said. The projector lit up. Financial data, overseas expansion, risk management. Voices followed, one after another, each executive trying not to stumble over words. Anthony listened, not with impatience, but with surgical focus. When one manager hesitated, Anthony interrupted calmly. "Say it clearly. Weak information weakens decisions." The man swallowed and continued. Chloe sat across the table, legs crossed elegantly, tablet resting on her knee. She watched Anthony like a puzzle she hadn't solved yet, not romantically, strategically. She admired power the way gamblers admired risk. When the meeting paused, Chloe spoke. "The Asian market isn't failing because of logistics," she said confidently. "It's failing because leadership is reactive, not predictive." The room stiffened. Anthony looked at her slowly. Everyone expected a sharp reply, but instead, Anthony simply said, "Send me the data after the meeting." No praise, no argument, no attention, just business. Chloe hid her disappointment behind professionalism. Anthony closed his folder. "We're done." Executives exhaled like prisoners released from court. As they left, Lucas entered, clapping softly. "Still terrifying," he joked. Anthony walked past him. "Fear keeps standards high." Lucas smirked. "Or keeps loneliness closer." Anthony didn't answer, because some truths weren't meant for the boardroom. By evening, Chicago dressed itself in gold. Limousines lined up outside the Grand Royale Hotel, headlights cutting through the night like ceremonial swords. Inside, crystal chandeliers glowed above marble floors polished enough to reflect privilege itself. Anthony Madison stood at the entrance, his presence commanding without effort. His tailored tuxedo hugged his frame perfectly, black and sharp against the warm lights of the ballroom. This wasn't business. It was society, and Anthony hated society. He came only because his name carried weight, and weight demanded visibility. As he stepped inside, conversations softened, cameras flashed quietly. Influential men and women whispered his name like a currency. Madison, the Madison heir, the man who controls half the city. Anthony moved through them without slowing. People tried to shake his hand. Some tried to flirt. Some tried to negotiate in disguise. Anthony did none of that. He nodded politely. He smiled strategically. And he escaped emotionally. Across the room, Chloe arrived moments later in a sleek, elegant gown, confidence resting on her shoulders like armor. She didn't walk beside Anthony, she positioned herself near him, close enough to be noticed, far enough to appear independent. She knew how society worked. Appear valuable, appear unavailable. Anthony noticed her only as movement in his peripheral vision, nothing more. His phone vibrated again. His mother, he answered reluctantly. Smile more, she whispered through the line. People think you're attending your own funeral. Anthony exhaled. This isn't my world. Yet you rule it, she replied gently. He ended the call, eyes scanning the room, but it felt empty. Anthony stood at the edge of luxury, king of a kingdom that demanded everything and gave very little back. Later that night, Anthony returned to his penthouse alone. The elevator doors closed softly behind him, sealing him back inside the quiet world he trusted more than people. He loosened his tie slowly, walking barefoot across the marble floor. Outside, the city pulsed with life, but inside, only his footsteps existed. He poured himself water instead of whiskey. Control mattered. Anthony sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows resting on his knees, staring ahead without really seeing anything. For the first time all day, there were no meetings, no numbers, no pressure, just space, and space made room for thoughts. He remembered college nights spent studying while others partied. He remembered turning down girls who saw his ambition before his humanity. He remembered promising himself that nothing emotional would ever weaken him. Success came first, always. Across the glass wall of his penthouse, Chicago blinked endlessly. Anthony stood and walked toward the window again, hands in his pockets, eyes reflecting the lights of a city that admired him but never truly knew him. Somewhere, his mother was probably praying he would fall in love before time goes. Anthony Madison hated invitations that sounded like commands, but his mother had perfected the art of polite force. By 8 in the evening, Anthony's black Aston Martin rolled into the driveway of the Madison family estate, a quiet mansion sitting on acres of controlled luxury. This wasn't his penthouse. This was history where expectations were born before excuses. Inside, candlelight reflected off antique walls. Classical music floated softly through the dining hall. Everything about the place whispered elegance, patience, and manipulation. Anthony removed his jacket slowly as the housekeeper welcomed him in. His mother stood near the fireplace, graceful, composed, eyes full of quiet concern. "You came," she said warmly. "I promised," Anthony replied. She smiled. "You always keep promises, even when you hate them." At the long dining table sat 3 women, not random women, carefully selected women, daughters of billionaires, heiresses, future queens of empires. Anthony paused. His mother gestured. "Just dinner." Anthony nodded once and walked forward. Introductions followed, polite smiles, controlled laughter, soft perfume in the air. Anthony listened, but didn't attach. One talked about art, another talked about investments, another talked about travel. Anthony talked about none. He answered only when spoken to. Halfway through the meal, one of them leaned closer. "Anthony, don't you ever get lonely?" Anthony lifted his glass slowly. "Loneliness is a luxury problem," he said calmly. "Some of us don't have time for it." Silence spread. His mother sighed inwardly. 10 minutes later, Anthony stood. "Thank you for dinner." His mother looked up. "Already?" Anthony straightened his jacket. "Yes." And just like that, another attempt at love died quietly under discipline. The next morning, Madison Tower woke before the sun. Anthony arrived earlier than usual, mood sharpened by wasted time the night before. He walked into his office to find Chloe already there, not waiting outside. Inside, she stood near the window, holding a tablet, long hair falling perfectly over her shoulders, heels resting lightly against the marble floor. "You approved the schedule change last night," she said calmly. Anthony frowned slightly. "You accessed my private calendar?" She turned, smiled faintly. "Efficiency requires anticipation." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Don't anticipate my personal life." Chloe stepped closer, confident but controlled. "I don't mix personal and professional, Anthony." He looked at her now, properly. Cold, sharp, unmoved. "Good, because I don't have a personal life at work." Chloe nodded, hiding irritation behind grace. "Your mother invited me to dinner tonight." Anthony paused. "For what reason?" She said. "You needed familiar company." Anthony exhaled slowly. There it was. Chloe didn't ask. She positioned. "Cancel," Anthony said. Chloe tilted her head. She already confirmed. Anthony stared at her for a long second, then calmly replied, then she'll unconfirm. Chloe's lips parted slightly, surprised. Anthony walked past her, and for the first time, Chloe felt something unfamiliar. Not attraction, but rejection. Real rejection. And rejection made her dangerous. Lucas arrived unannounced again. Like always, he entered Anthony's office holding two coffees. You look like you murdered romance again, Lucas said casually. Anthony didn't look up. Romance committed suicide. Lucas chuckled and dropped into the chair across him. Your mom called me, again. Anthony sighed. Why does she recruit my enemies? Lucas smiled. Because I'm the only one who tells you the truth. Anthony finally looked up, and Lucas leaned forward. You're 30, rich, handsome, feared, and emotionally unavailable. Anthony raised a brow. Sounds efficient. Lucas laughed. Sounds lonely. Anthony closed his laptop slowly. I don't need distraction. Lucas smirked. You need collision. Before Anthony could reply, Chloe passed the glass wall slowly, eyes meeting Lucas briefly. Lucas watched her go. She likes you, he said. Anthony replied instantly. She likes control. Lucas smiled wider. Same thing, different language. Anthony stood. Get back to work, Lucas. Lucas rose too. Just promise me something. Anthony paused. What? Lucas's tone softened. Don't build an empire so tall that no one can reach you anymore. Anthony didn't answer, because some advice sounds like prophecy when you don't want it to be. By noon, Madison Tower no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a stage. Anthony Madison stood before the tall glass wall of his office, hands behind his back, watching reporters gather outside the building entrance below. Their cameras glittered like restless insects, hungry for a story that went beyond stocks and mergers. He hadn't invited attention. Attention invited itself when power stayed quiet too long. Behind him, Chloe entered softly, tablet in hand, heels tapping with rehearsed calm. The media is requesting an interview, she said. Anthony didn't turn. For what? They're calling you the city's most eligible CEO. They want comments about your future, personal plans. Anthony finally faced her. My future is corporate. Chloe nodded. That's not interesting to people. Anthony's eyes sharpened. People don't control me. Chloe walked closer, placing the tablet on his desk. But perception controls markets. He paused. She was right. Reluctantly, Anthony adjusted his cufflinks. 5 minutes. Minutes later, flashes exploded in the lobby. Microphones lifted toward him. Mr. Madison, is it true you've rejected every woman introduced to you? Anthony's expression remained neutral. I reject inefficiency, not people. Another voice followed. Do you believe love weakens leadership? Anthony paused briefly. Love distracts discipline. The room murmured. Outside, Chloe watched quietly, satisfied. Not because she loved him, but because the world was finally being forced to look at him the way she already did. Unreachable, misunderstood, and dangerously attractive. That evening, Chloe didn't go home immediately. She stayed behind after the office emptied, heels echoing softly through Madison Tower's quiet corridors. She entered Anthony's office alone, not to break rules, but to bend them. She stood by his desk, touching nothing, studying everything: his chair, his books, his untouched whiskey, his perfectly arranged files. Anthony Madison lived like a man who feared disorder, and Chloe understood control better than affection. She opened her phone and dialed quietly. Yes, Mrs. Madison, she said softly. A pause. I stayed late to prepare tomorrow's agenda. Another pause. I know he resists, but resistance is often protection, not certainty. She smiled faintly. No, I won't push him. I'll let him walk closer himself. She ended the call. Chloe slipped her phone back into her purse and looked out at the city. She didn't want Anthony. She wanted position. And Anthony Madison was the highest position available. Control disguised as affection always moved slower, but it lasted longer. She turned off the office lights and walked out quietly, already calculating tomorrow. Anthony returned to his penthouse late, not tired, disturbed. He loosened his tie and walked toward the balcony, cold air brushing against his face as Chicago's lights blinked endlessly beneath him. His mind replayed the reporter's question. Do you believe love weakens leadership? He had answered quickly, too quickly. Anthony gripped the railing lightly, breathing slow. He had conquered markets, negotiated wars between corporations, destroyed competitors without emotion. Yet a single word love unsettled him more than loss. Inside the penthouse, silence followed him like a shadow. He poured water again instead of alcohol. Discipline mattered, but tonight discipline felt heavier than usual, somewhere between ambition and isolation. Anthony Madison began to realize something unfamiliar. Control wasn't breaking, it was stretching, and stretched things eventually snapped, whether they wanted to or not. By the end of the week, the word followed Anthony Madison everywhere. Love. It appeared in magazines, in boardrooms disguised as curiosity, in casual jokes from investors pretending not to care. Anthony sat at the long conference table, fingers folded, eyes fixed on the projection screen showing quarterly performance. Numbers were beautiful. Numbers didn't ask questions, but humans did. One of the executives cleared his throat lightly. Excellent growth this quarter, sir. And Anthony's gaze lifted. And the man hesitated. Investors are curious about your long-term stability. Family image boosts confidence. Silence thickened. Anthony leaned back slowly. My stability is financial. The room froze. Another executive tried softly. They mean a partner, sir. Anthony's jaw tightened. A company doesn't need romance to survive. No one replied. Meeting dismissed. As Anthony stood, chairs scraped nervously. Power was loud without raising its voice, but frustration was louder inside. Later that afternoon, Chloe entered Anthony's office holding a small velvet box. She didn't ask permission. She rarely did. Anthony looked up briefly. What is that? Chloe smiled gently. An invitation. She placed the box on his desk and opened it. Inside lay 2 elegant gala cards tied together. Charity ball, she said. Couples only seating. Anthony closed the box without touching the cards. No. Chloe blinked. It's public image, Anthony. He stood slowly. My image is productivity. Chloe's voice softened deliberately. Your mother thinks. Anthony cut her off. I don't care what my mother thinks about my personal life. Chloe paused. Her mask slipped slightly. You can't run a billion-dollar empire alone forever. Anthony stepped closer now, voice low but firm. Watch me. The air shifted. Chloe stepped back, realizing she had finally touched something dangerous. Not attraction, but anger. She picked up the box quietly and left without another word. Anthony remained standing, breathing steady but eyes stormed with restrained fire. Love wasn't knocking anymore. It was invading. Anthony found Lucas in the gym that night, not because he wanted company, but because anger needed movement. Metal clanged as Anthony struck the punching bag again and again, muscles tightening with every controlled blow. Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with amusement. You're fighting love like it owes you money. Anthony didn't stop. It's a distraction. Lucas shrugged. So is sleep. Yet you still need it. Anthony finally paused, breathing heavy. Everyone suddenly wants to script my life. Lucas walked closer. Because you've mastered everything except connection. Anthony wiped sweat from his jaw. I don't need it. Lucas smiled knowingly. You say that like someone trying to convince himself. Anthony picked up his towel. Drop the topic. Lucas raised his hands. All right, then added quietly. But one day, something will ignore your schedule. Anthony froze for half a second. Lucas grinned. And that's when your real story starts. Anthony didn't respond, but something inside him listened. Anthony Madison woke before his alarm, not because he was rested, but because his mind refused to power down. The city outside his penthouse window was still half asleep, lights blinking lazily across steel towers, streets whispering instead of roaring. Anthony stood by the glass with his coffee untouched, thoughts looping back to the same irritation he had tried to bury the night before. Love. The word clung to him like static. Boardrooms had started sounding like therapy rooms, investors sounded like relatives, his mother sounded like destiny, and Chloe sounded like strategy pretending to be concerned. Anthony adjusted his cufflinks, already dressed, already armored. He didn't fall in love. He didn't pause. He didn't soften. Time was his religion. At Madison Tower, his day unfolded in ruthless precision. Meetings stacked like dominoes. Contracts signed without hesitation. Decisions fired like bullets. Yet beneath the discipline, something restless stirred. Not desire, pressure. Even Lucas noticed it when he walked into Anthony's office without knocking, holding his phone and smiling too much. "Tonight," Lucas said. Anthony didn't look up. "No." Lucas leaned on the desk. "Yes." Anthony finally raised his eyes. "I don't celebrate birthdays." Lucas laughed. "You don't celebrate anything. That's the problem." Anthony returned to his screen. "Problem solved." Lucas sighed. "Come eat with me. Same restaurant I always go. Best food in the city." Anthony shook his head slightly. "I don't eat for pleasure." Lucas smiled wider. "Exactly why you're coming." Anthony paused. Lucas added, "1 hour. My birthday. Then you disappear back into your empire." Anthony hesitated, not because he wanted to go, but because refusing Lucas always felt unnecessary. Finally, he closed his laptop. 1 hour. Lucas grinned. Progress. Neither of them knew that 1 hour would quietly rewrite everything. The restaurant didn't look like Anthony Madison's world. No gold chandeliers, no marble columns, no billionaire silence. It was warm, alive. Soft music floated through the air. The smell of spice, grilled meat, and fresh bread wrapped around the space like comfort instead of intimidation. Anthony stepped inside and immediately felt out of place. People laughed too freely here. Lucas inhaled deeply. "Told you, best food in the city." Anthony scanned the room's students. Couples, working-class professionals, tourists. No one recognized him. For once, Anthony Madison was in a headline. They took a seat near the window. Lucas ordered easily, familiar with the menu. Anthony barely looked at it. "Whatever you're eating," he said. Lucas smiled. "Living dangerously, huh?" Minutes passed. Then footsteps approached their table. Soft, careful. A young woman stood before them holding a tray. Her hair fell in long curls down her shoulders. Not styled, just naturally obedient to gravity. Her face was beautiful in a quiet way, not dramatic, not elite, but the kind of beauty people overlook until it stays with them. Her uniform fit neatly, simple and clean. She smiled politely. "Your order, gentlemen." Her voice was calm, slightly tired, but warm. As she leaned forward, her foot slid against the smooth floor. It happened fast, too fast. The plate tilted, sauce splashed, and the dish landed directly on Anthony Madison's chest. Silence swallowed the room. Anthony froze, not because of the mess, but because control had been publicly violated. The sauce soaked into his suit. The room held its breath. The girl's face drained of color. "I am so sorry, sir." Anthony stood instantly. "Do you have any idea what you just ruined?" Lucas jumped in. "Anthony, it's fine." "No, it's not," Anthony snapped. The girl's hands trembled. "It was an accident, please." Anthony didn't hear apology. He heard interruption. "Call your manager." The restaurant went quiet. People stared. Phones paused mid-air. The girl swallowed hard. "Sir, please, I'll clean it." "I said call your manager." Lucas stood. "Anthony, you're overreacting." Anthony turned sharply. "You brought me here." The manager arrived, nervous. "What happened?" Anthony pointed at his chest. "Incompetence." The girl whispered. "My name is Ivy." "I didn't mean." Anthony cut her off. "Fire her." Gasps spread softly. Lucas stared at him. "Anthony." Anthony's eyes didn't soften. "Now." The manager hesitated. "But money has a voice." "Ivy, you're dismissed." Her eyes filled instantly. "I need this job, sir. I'm a student." Anthony grabbed his jacket. "Not my problem." He turned to leave, but he wasn't done. Outside, he made a call. "Blacklist the waitress." Ivy Winchester. I don't want her working anywhere affiliated with Madison Holdings. He ended the call coldly. Inside, Ivy stood frozen, not fired, erased. Rain followed Ivy home, not loudly, quietly, like the world was ashamed to cry with her. She walked through empty streets, uniform soaked, curls clinging to her face, mind replaying the moment again and again. Not the spill, the voice, the cold dismissal. Her apartment was small, students small, bare walls, one lamp, a single bed, books stacked beside unpaid bills. She dropped her bag and slid down the wall slowly. Her hands shook. She had paid her own tuition, bought her own food, survived without anyone's permission. And in one evening, a stranger erased her survival. Tears finally came, not dramatic, silent, heavy. She whispered to herself, it was just an accident, but the world didn't care about accidents when power spoke louder than truth. Outside, the city kept moving, and somewhere above it all, Anthony Madison slept peacefully, unaware that discipline had just crossed into cruelty. Anthony Madison didn't dream, he calculated, but that night, calculations failed. He lay on his king-sized bed staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, the city's glow leaking softly through sheer curtains, yet his mind refused to rest. Instead of numbers, contracts, or mergers, he saw sauce falling, a tray tilting, a girl's trembling hands. Ivy Winchester's face replayed itself without permission, not the accident, the aftermath. Her eyes when the manager said, "You're dismissed." Anthony turned on his side, irritated at himself. It was just a waitress, just an accident, just another human error. Yet his chest tightened slightly, not emotionally, but mentally, like unfinished business scratching at discipline. He rose and poured water, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked powerful, but power without mercy felt strangely loud in silence. Back at Madison Tower the next day, Anthony snapped at assistants. Meetings ended faster. His patience shortened. Lucas noticed it instantly. "You look like someone stole your piece." Anthony didn't reply, because peace had never argued with him before, and now it wouldn't shut up. While Anthony wrestled with thoughts, Ivy wrestled with survival. She woke before sunrise, dressed simply, and carried her arsum like hope folded in paper. Restaurant to cafe, hotel to lounge, bistro to catering company. Every door felt polite. Every answer felt rehearsed. "We'll call you." Position filled, not hiring. System restriction. By the fourth day, Ivy noticed something strange. Managers would check their systems, then hesitate. Their smiles would fade. One even whispered, "I'm sorry, your name is flagged." Flagged for spilling food. Ivy walked the city with tired curls tied loosely, shoes thinning, hope shrinking, until one afternoon, inside a quiet cafe, a middle-aged manager studied her arsum longer than others. "You're Ivy Winchester?" She nodded carefully. He lowered his voice. "Someone powerful blocked your employment trail." Her heart jumped. "Why?" The man sighed. "Because money talks louder than mistakes." He hesitated, then slid a card across the counter. "Go to Madison Tower, beg if you must." Ivy's fingers trembled. "Anthony Madison?" The manager nodded. "He's the only one who can undo it." Hope returned, fragile, shaking, desperate. Madison Tower didn't feel human. It felt engineered. Steel, glass, height, silence. Ivy stood at the entrance clutching her bag, eyes tracing upward until the sky swallowed the building. At reception, her voice shook. "I need to see Mr. Anthony Madison." The receptionist smiled politely. "Appointments only." "I just need a minute." The smile stayed firm. "Appointments only." So Ivy waited. Day 1 rain soaked her shoes. Day 2 sunburned her face. Day 3 wind tested her patience. She sat across the street watching executives enter like time belonged to them. On the 4th morning, black cars arrived. Anthony Madison's car stopped at the gate. Ivy stood quickly. "Sir." The car moved. Didn't pause. Didn't look back. Her chest dropped. Something inside her snapped quietly. The next day, she stepped directly in front of the vehicle. Security shouted. The driver braked. Anthony's window lowered slowly. His eyes met hers. Surprised, annoyed, alive. I asked for an audience, Ivy said, breathing hard. Anthony stared coldly. You're blocking traffic. I'm blocking injustice. Silence hovered. Finally, the door opened. 5 minutes became permission. Inside Anthony's office, Ivy stood smaller than the walls around her. Glass, steel, sky. Anthony didn't offer her a seat. You have 3 minutes. Ivy swallowed. You destroyed my work life. Anthony crossed his arms. You destroyed my suit. Her eyes flared. I apologized. Anthony's voice stayed calm. Apologies don't fix incompetence. Something shifted inside Ivy. Begging died. Truth woke up. You think money makes you God? She snapped quietly. Anthony's brow tightened. You think power gives you the right to erase people? Silence grew thick. Ivy's voice trembled but stayed strong. I worked for my education. I served to survive. You ruin lives over accidents and sleep peacefully. Anthony's jaw clenched. You chose your path. Ivy stepped back slowly. No, you chose mine. Tears burned but didn't fall. I hope your empire teaches you what humanity feels like. She turned and walked out, not fired, finished. That night, Anthony couldn't sleep, not because she begged, but because she didn't. Anthony's discipline collapsed quietly after that day. He stared at files without reading. He answered questions without hearing. He slept without resting. Chloe noticed instantly. You're distracted, she said. Anthony ignored her. For the first time, Chloe didn't matter. Instead, Ivy's words echoed. You chose mine. On the third sleepless night, Anthony stood and made a decision that surprised even himself. Find Ivy Winchester, he ordered his assistant. A pause. Send her a message. Another pause. If she wants the issue settled, she should come to my office. He ended the call. Power had finally blinked, not out of kindness, but curiosity. And curiosity always came before change. Ivy didn't hesitate after receiving the message. No pride, no delay. She read the words over and over on her phone. If you want the issue settled, come to Madison Tower. By morning, she was already dressed in her cleanest blouse, curls falling freely down her shoulders, eyes tired but determined. Madison Tower looked colder than before, stronger. As Ivy approached the entrance, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, a familiar voice stopped her. And where do you think you're going? Chloe stood in front of her, arms crossed, dressed in corporate perfection. I have an appointment, Ivy replied calmly. Chloe laughed without humor. With who? The CEO doesn't meet waitresses. I was invited. Chloe stepped closer, eyes sharp. By mistake, she turned to the secretary. Don't let her in. Before the secretary could answer, Anthony's office blinds shifted slightly. Through the glass, his eyes lifted. He saw Ivy. He lifted his hand once. A silent signal. Let her in. The secretary obeyed immediately. Chloe's face stiffened. What? Anthony's voice came through the intercom. Both of you, inside. Chloe followed, already burning. Inside the office, Ivy stood quietly. Chloe tried to speak. Anthony, this girl is. Wait outside, Anthony said without lifting his eyes. Chloe froze. What? I said outside. Her lips parted in disbelief. She stormed out, heels echoing angrily down the hall. Humiliation wrapped around her pride, and suddenly, it was only Ivy and Anthony. Anthony didn't offer Ivy a seat. He circled his desk slowly, studying her like a contract, not a person. You look different without a tray. Ivy didn't answer. He stopped in front of her. Age, 24, education, hospitality and business administration. He nodded slightly, then his tone shifted. Let's discuss what you cost me. Ivy blinked. Cost you? Anthony tapped his tablet. My suit, imported, custom made, $200,000. Ivy's breath caught. Your interruption. My schedule delay. Miss meeting. Estimated loss $3 million. Her eyes widened. Public embarrassment. Reputation management $1.2 million. He finally looked at her. Total $4,200,000. The room felt smaller. I can't afford that, Ivy whispered. Anthony raised his hand when she tried to speak. Don't. She tried again. It was an accident. Don't. Her voice broke slightly. You ruined my life over one plate. Anthony's jaw tightened. You walked into mine. Silence stretched, then Ivy straightened. I'll work. I'll pay little by little. Anthony leaned closer. You don't earn enough to breathe near that number. She swallowed. Then what do you want? Anthony paused as a man calculating chaos. Finally, he spoke. Be in a relationship with me. The words fell heavy. Ivy stared. What? Fake? Public? 6 months. Her chest tightened. You're buying me? Anthony's voice stayed calm. No, I'm using opportunity. Go home, he said finally. Think about it. Ivy didn't cry on the way home. She thought. The city moved around her, but her mind stayed locked inside Anthony's office. $4 million. Fake relationship. 6 months. At home, she sat on her bed staring at her ceiling. Curls spread over her pillow. Heart racing without running. Was she angry? Yes. Was she tempted? Maybe. Was she desperate? Definitely. She whispered to herself. He thinks I'm property. But reality answered back. You need survival. Bills stacked. Tuition unpaid. Work blocked. Night fell. Sleep didn't. She turned left. Turned right. Sat up. Anthony's voice replayed. Control. By dawn, Ivy still hadn't rested. And outside, life kept getting worse. Calls unanswered. Interviews cancelled. Doors still locked. The city reminded her. Sometimes pride starves faster than hunger. Morning entered Ivy's room quietly, like it didn't want to disturb her thoughts. But her thoughts were already awake. She hadn't slept. Not because of fear, but because of choice. $4 million. 6 months. Fake relationship. Power didn't ask gently. It demanded strategy. By Ivy stood again in Madison Tower. Curls loose, expression calmer than she felt. The receptionist blinked in surprise. You're back. I have an answer. Minutes later, she was inside Anthony's office. He didn't look shocked. He expected her. Anthony closed his laptop slowly. Sit. Ivy sat. He slid a document across the desk. Before signatures, come rules. Her fingers paused. Anthony stood and began walking. Rule 1. You speak when I permit in public. Rule 2. You attend events when I demand. Rule 3. You don't expose this arrangement. Rule 4. You don't embarrass Madison image. Rule 5. You follow lifestyle upgrades. Ivy raised her head. Upgrades? Anthony met her gaze. You don't represent yourself anymore. Silence fell. Ivy inhaled. So I become your project? Anthony replied flatly. You become my responsibility. She stared at the paper. Ink looked heavier than law. Slowly, she signed. And power officially touched her life. Transformation didn't start with love. It started with discipline. The next morning, a black car arrived for Ivy. Inside sat a woman in her 40s, posture royal, eyes sharp. I'm Madame Elise, she said. Etiquette consultant. Ivy blinked. For what? For survival among the elite. And so began Ivy's education in a world that smelled like money. How to sit without shrinking. How to walk without apologizing. How to speak without sounding small. Fork placement. Eye contact. Silence control. Elise corrected everything. No slouching. No rush steps. No nervous fingers. Ivy learned that rich people didn't move fast. They moved certain. By afternoon, boxes arrived. Clothes, silk dresses, heels, coats, jewelry. Anthony didn't choose cheap. Each piece whispered power. Ivy touched them like they were foreign language. She wasn't becoming rich. She was being translated. Anthony watched her progress silently. From reports, from videos, from distance, until the real demand arrived. Change residence, he said one evening. Ivy paused. What? You'll move closer to my world. She stiffened. My school is near my place. Anthony replied calmly. You're near poverty, not progress. Her chest tightened. That apartment is my life. Anthony stepped closer. It's your past. Silence thickened. Ivy finally spoke. I won't leave. Anthony blinked slowly. You signed. She lifted her chin. I didn't sell my roots. For the first time, Anthony looked curious. not angry, challenged. "You're resisting." "I'm surviving," she corrected. Anthony stared at her longer than planned. Control met identity, and neither bowed yet. The city learned fast. Photos leaked. Anthony Madison seen with unknown woman. Hands not touching. Distance calculated. Yet rumors screamed louder than truth. At their first event, Ivy wore black silk, curls falling naturally. People whispered. Anthony offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it. Flashlights burst. Elite circles paused. The CEO who feared attachment now walked beside mystery. Chloe watched from across the hall. Her smile cracked. Power didn't choose her, it recruited Ivy, and jealousy learned a new enemy. Back in the car, neither spoke. Anthony stared ahead. Ivy stared at her hands. The fake relationship had begun, but something real felt dangerously close. Not love, but proximity. Power had invited humanity into its system, and humanity was unpredictable. Anthony finally broke the silence. "You did well." Ivy looked up slightly, not smiling, not thanking, just noticing. And in that quiet space between domination and dignity, their real story prepared itself. Ivy thought pretending would be easy. Smile in public, disappear in private, return to her student life quietly. But life doesn't like balance. The morning after the gala, Ivy walked into her university campus wearing clothes she didn't buy with student money anymore. Not flashy, just expensive in silence. The wind played with her long curls as she crossed the courtyard. Backpack on her shoulder, heels softer than usual sneakers. Eyes followed her. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. "That's her, Anthony Madison's woman. She looks normal though." Normal hurt more than insult. Inside her class, students stared instead of listened. Professors paused. Phones hid under desks, recording presence instead of lectures. Ivy sat down, heart unsettled. She wasn't rich here. She wasn't poor there. She existed in between. And in between, people don't belong. During break, her friend Leela leaned close. "You're dating the city's coldest billionaire?" Ivy whispered back. "It's complicated." Leela smiled nervously. "So is jealousy." Across the hall, girls measured Ivy's clothes, her curls, her posture comparing silently. Elite divide wasn't only money, it was perception, and Ivy felt it tightening around her like invisible thread. Anthony didn't move her yet, but he changed her space. That evening, Ivy returned home and froze. Her apartment looked reorganized, not destroyed, upgraded. New curtains, fresh furniture, security camera blinking softly. She exhaled sharply. Anthony stood by the window when she entered. "You crossed my privacy," she said. He turned slowly. "You crossed into my life." Silence. She dropped her bag. "This place is mine," Anthony replied calmly. "It's protected now." She walked past him, touching the couch. "You're turning my home into a branch office." Anthony studied her. "For 6 months, danger doesn't need invitation." Ivy laughed softly. "So now even my walls report to you?" He didn't answer. "Because some control doesn't need explanation." She finally sat, rubbing her temples. "You're suffocating me." Anthony paused. "Not as CEO, as man." "I'm preventing chaos," Ivy whispered. "You are the chaos." And for the first time, Anthony didn't reply immediately. Chloe didn't scream. She calculated in the office. She watched Ivy's name move through Anthony's calendar like forbidden ink. Meetings delayed, schedules altered, security reassigned, all because of one girl with curls and accident history. Chloe smiled politely while dialing phones secretly. Cancel Ivy's access badge, delay her files, move her car pickup, not enough to expose, just enough to exhaust. One afternoon, Ivy waited outside Madison Tower for 40 minutes. No car, no driver, rain fell slowly, dampening her dress, curls turning heavy inside. Chloe sipped coffee calmly, until Anthony noticed Ivy's name still active on tracking screen. "She's outside?" The security chief nodded. "Yes, sir, in the rain." Anthony's jaw tightened. He stood, walked past Chloe without greeting, and for the first time in weeks, Chloe felt invisible outside. Anthony removed his coat and placed it on Ivy's shoulders. You're soaked. Ivy looked up, surprised. Your people forgot me. Anthony's eyes darkened slightly. No. He glanced back at the building. They didn't. In the car, Ivy hugged the coat closer, not because of cold, because of something unfamiliar. Anthony drove silently, then spoke softly. Did anyone interfere with you today? She hesitated. Not directly. Anthony nodded. Silence again. Then Ivy whispered, Why do you care? Anthony stopped at a red light, looked at her briefly. Because public lies still deserve private safety. The words surprised both of them. Ivy watched the city blur outside. She wasn't used to men protecting without touching. Anthony wasn't used to women resisting without breaking. Something invisible was learning shape between them. Not love, not yet, but respect. And respect is more dangerous to power than emotion. That night, Ivy stood in her apartment mirror, removing makeup slowly. She studied herself. Not the clothes, not the curls, but the change. She wasn't pretending anymore. She was adapting. Across the city, Anthony sat alone in his penthouse, watching skyline instead of reports. His phone buzzed with Chloe's message. He ignored it. Instead, his mind replayed Ivy standing in rain, not begging, not complaining, just waiting. He exhaled quietly. Power wasn't supposed to feel responsible, but something inside him was rewriting its rules, and Ivy, without trying, was becoming the exception in a system built on control. 6 months was supposed to be business, but business doesn't warm coats, and contracts don't notice silence. Yet both of them did. Anthony Madison had always been predictable, not gentle, not soft, predictable in control. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., the gym. By 7:45, black coffee. By 8:10, board review. By 9 o'clock, silence. But lately, silence didn't obey him anymore. That morning, the conference room felt smaller than usual. Executives sat straight, tablets ready, mouths cautious. Anthony stood at the head of the table, fingers resting on glass. The report flashed on the screen. Numbers wrong, deadlines missed, excuses layered like dust. Anthony's jaw tightened slowly. Explain, he said. One manager cleared his throat. Sir, the marketing delay. Anthony cut him off. No. The room froze. You don't delay Madison standards. The man tried again. Anthony slammed his palm on the table. The sound cracked through the air. I pay you to think before you speak. Silence swallowed the room. Someone dropped a pen. Anthony's anger had a reputation, not violent, but surgical. When he snapped, careers bled quietly. He exhaled sharply. Meeting dismissed. Chairs scraped. People escaped. Only one stayed behind. Lucas, Anthony's only friend who wasn't scared of his storms. Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Damn Madison, he said casually. Did Ivy steal your patience too? Anthony shot him a glare. Don't start. Lucas smirked. I miss the days you only abused spreadsheets. Anthony turned away. Lucas walked closer. You're distracted. Anthony scoffed. By what? Lucas tilted his head. By the girl you pretend not to notice. Silence again. Anthony grabbed his jacket. Get out. Lucas laughed softly. Relax. You're angry because you care and hate caring. Anthony paused. Just a second, then walked out. But the words stayed. By noon, Anthony sat alone in his office, staring at documents he wasn't reading. Lucas entered without knocking. As usual, he dropped into the chair opposite Anthony's desk. So, Anthony didn't look up. No, Lucas chuckled. You're dating a mystery girl, getting softer, and pretending nothing changed. Anthony closed the file slowly. She's an arrangement. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Arrangements don't make you yell at million-dollar managers. Anthony leaned back. You always talk too much. Lucas leaned forward. You always feel too little. Anthony's eyes sharpened. Lucas continued calmly. I saw you put your coat on her. Anthony blinked. You spy now? No, I observe. Anthony stood. I'm not in love. Lucas smiled slightly. That's what makes it dangerous. Anthony's voice dropped. Don't test me. Lucas stood too. Relax, CEO, I like her. Anthony froze. You what? Lucas shrugged. She's real. Different from Chloe's plastic ambition. Anthony's tone hardened. Stay away from her. Lucas smirked. There it is. Anthony turned sharply. Out. Lucas walked away laughing, but Anthony stayed frozen, because jealousy wasn't supposed to live in his system, and yet, it just installed itself quietly. By noon, Anthony sat alone in his office, staring at documents he wasn't reading. Lucas entered without knocking. As usual, he dropped into the chair opposite Anthony's desk. So, Anthony didn't look up. No, Lucas chuckled. You're dating a mystery girl, getting softer, and pretending nothing changed. Anthony closed the file slowly. She's an arrangement. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Arrangements don't make you yell at million-dollar managers. Anthony leaned back. You always talk too much. Lucas leaned forward. You always feel too little. Anthony's eyes sharpened. Lucas continued calmly. I saw you put your coat on her. Anthony blinked. You spy now? No, I observe. Anthony stood. I'm not in love. Lucas smiled slightly. That's what makes it dangerous. Anthony's voice dropped. Don't test me. Lucas stood too. Relax, CEO. I like her. Anthony froze. You what? Lucas shrugged. She's real. Different from Chloe's plastic ambition. Anthony's tone hardened. Stay away from her. Lucas smirked. There it is. Anthony turned sharply. Out. Lucas walked away laughing, but Anthony stayed frozen, because jealousy wasn't supposed to live in his system, and yet, it just installed itself quietly. At the same time, Ivy lived another version of reality. That afternoon at school, whispers grew louder. Not admiration, comparison. Girls stared, boys speculated. One student whispered too loudly, she thinks she's rich now. Another laughed, she's just borrowed luxury. Ivy kept walking, but words don't stay outside skin. In class, her professor paused. Miss Winchester, care to answer? Ivy stood, heart steady. She answered correctly. The room stayed silent. Brains didn't interest them anymore. Status did. After class, Leela walked beside her. They're jealous. Ivy smiled weakly. I didn't ask to be noticed. Leela whispered. Attention notices people who try to escape it. Outside, Ivy waited for the car. Anthony arrived himself. She looked surprised. You're early, he replied quietly. You look tired this morning. She studied him. Not CEO, not billionaire, just a man who noticed weather on people. Inside the car, she finally asked, why are you angry lately? Anthony hesitated. I hate inefficiency. She smiled faintly. You hate emotions more. He didn't deny it. That evening, they sat in silence again. Anthony finally spoke. Lucas thinks you're changing me. Ivy looked at him slowly. Am I? Anthony stared ahead. I don't change. She replied gently. Everyone does when someone walks close enough. Anthony exhaled. You're temporary. Ivy nodded. So are storms. He glanced at her. She wasn't flirting. She wasn't begging. She was existing. An existence disturbed systems built on walls. Back in her apartment, Ivy paused before leaving the car. Anthony. He looked at her. Thank you for today. He nodded slightly. She walked inside. Anthony remained in the car longer than usual. Anger used to fuel him. Now, confusion did. And confusion was dangerous for a man who controlled everything except attachment. And when power bends, something human always slips through. Power had a smell. Not perfume, not money. It smelled like rooms where people pretended kindness while measuring worth. That night, Anthony took Ivy to a private investor's reception. Not for romance, for image. Crystal lights hovered above marble floors. Champagne whispered in thin glasses. Voices laughed too politely. Ivy walked beside Anthony, curls flowing down her shoulders. Dressed simple but elegant. She didn't belong, and everyone knew it. At first, the whispers were quiet. Who is she? She's not corporate. She's temporary. Ivy felt ice scrape her skin. Anthony didn't notice yet. He spoke business, shook hands, controlled space, until Chloe arrived. Her heels clicked like warning. She wore ambition better than silk. Chloe smiled at Ivy. Fake. Ivy darling, she said softly. You finally made it into our circle. Ivy replied politely. Thank you. Chloe leaned closer. Circles are dangerous when you don't know how to swim. Ivy frowned. Before she could respond, Chloe turned to a group of executives' wives. This is Anthony's project, Chloe announced lightly. Project. The word sliced. The women laughed politely. One asked, so she's not permanent? Chloe smiled. Anthony doesn't keep emotions long. Ivy stood frozen. Air felt thinner. People began questioning her background, where she studied, who her parents were, why she dressed modest instead of powerful. One woman whispered, pretty but unfinished. Another added, borrowed class. Ivy's hands trembled, not because she was weak, but because humiliation always arrived smiling. Anthony finally noticed her silence. He turned and saw Ivy standing alone in a crowd built to erase people. His jaw tightened. Chloe wasn't finished. She never was. She approached Ivy again holding champagne. Tell me, Chloe said sweetly, how does it feel jumping social classes overnight? Ivy answered calmly, I didn't jump. I walked. Chloe laughed softly. Walking doesn't work here. Then she raised her voice slightly. Anthony, darling, did you tell her about your past girlfriends? Anthony paused mid-conversation. What? Chloe smiled. They always leave once they realize love isn't part of your contract. Silence rippled. Eyes turned. Anthony stared at Chloe. Cold, dangerously calm. Ivy lowered her gaze. Chloe continued. Poor Ivy probably thinks this is destiny. That was when Anthony snapped. He stepped forward, voice low, sharp. Enough. The room froze. Chloe blinked. Anthony continued. You don't speak for me. Chloe scoffed. I'm protecting your image. Anthony's eyes darkened. You're disrespecting my guest. Gasps spread. Anthony took Ivy's hand. Not for cameras, for dignity. He looked around the room. Anyone confused about her presence should be confused about mine. Silence thundered. Chloe's smile finally collapsed. Anthony turned to Ivy. We're leaving, and Power walked out with humanity beside it. Outside, cold air touched Ivy's cheeks. She finally breathed. Inside the car, she whispered, Thank you. Anthony didn't answer immediately. His hands gripped the steering wheel. I hate manipulation, he said. Ivy nodded. Chloe hates losing. Anthony drove silently. Across the city, Lucas sat in a cafe scrolling security logs. Not because he was bored, because he didn't trust Chloe. He had noticed strange emails, meeting schedules altered, invitations Ivy wasn't meant to receive. Lucas frowned, then he found it. A forwarded message Chloe sent anonymously to investors. She's temporary. She's replaceable. She's Anthony's mistake. Lucas exhaled sharply. So that's your game. He closed his laptop and smiled faintly. Anthony Madison hated lies, and Chloe just handed Lucas ammunition. Back at Ivy's apartment, Anthony followed her inside for the first time. Not business, not contract, human. The place smelled like books and tea. Anthony paused. This is simple. Ivy smiled. Safe. He walked slowly, studying her world. No gold, no marble, just effort. Anthony sat quietly. Minutes passed. Then Ivy asked softly, Why do you hate love? Anthony didn't answer. She waited. Finally, he spoke. My father loved recklessly. Pause. He lost everything. Another pause. My mother cried while debt replaced laughter. Anthony exhaled. I learned control before affection. Ivy sat beside him, not touching, just close. Control protects you, she said. But it starves you too. Anthony stared ahead. No anger, no dominance, just honesty slipping through armor. For the first time, Ivy saw the boy inside the billionaire, and Anthony saw the woman inside the waitress turned illusion. Anthony left Ivy's apartment later than he planned, not because of traffic, not because of work, because emotions delay powerful men more than meetings ever could. The elevator doors closed quietly behind him, and suddenly the world returned to glass, metal, and engines. He sat in his car without starting it. City lights reflected against the windshield like memories that refused to fade. Anthony Madison was used to walking away from things, deals, people, even promises. But walking away from Ivy felt different. She didn't beg, didn't perform, didn't chase wealth. She lived inside effort. Anthony finally started the engine and drove. At every red light, her voice replayed softly in his mind. Control protects you, but it starves you too. He tightened his grip on the wheel. Starving wasn't something billionaires admitted to. Yet, somewhere between towers and traffic, Anthony felt something unfamiliar, a quiet ache that didn't belong to business. Back in his penthouse, the space felt too large, too clean, too empty. He removed his jacket, dropped it on the couch, and walked toward the window. 30 floors below, life kept moving. People loved, people failed, people healed. Anthony only calculated. But that night, calculation didn't bring peace. He poured himself a drink, stared at it, then pushed it away untouched. Instead, he picked up his phone, paused, then locked the screen again. Because powerful men hated admitting they wanted to hear someone's voice. Across the city, Lucas sat alone in his apartment with lights off except for his laptop glow. He wasn't working, he was thinking, which for Lucas was dangerous. His screen showed Chloe's profile photo from a corporate site. Perfect posture, sharp eyes, controlled smile. Lucas exhaled. She'll never look at you, he muttered, yet his heart kept betraying logic. Lucas liked Chloe long before Ivy entered Anthony's world. Not because Chloe was kind, but because she was unreachable. Lucas had always liked difficult people. He remembered the first day Chloe joined the company, how she walked past everyone like gravity obeyed her. Lucas noticed her ambition before her beauty, but ambition had thorns. And lately, those thorns pointed at Ivy. Lucas leaned back and closed his eyes. She's wrong, he whispered, but liking someone didn't stop you from seeing their darkness. His phone vibrated. A message from Chloe. Did Anthony say anything about tonight? Lucas stared. His thumb hovered, then typed. He left early. Didn't look happy. 3 dots appeared, then stopped, then appeared again. Finally, she's changing him. Lucas frowned, and for the first time, he didn't defend Chloe. Instead, he replied, or maybe she's showing him who he really is. Silence followed. Lucas placed the phone down and smiled sadly. Sometimes love doesn't make you closer. It reveals distance you ignored. Morning found Ivy awake before her alarm. The sun slipped quietly through her curtains, touching her books, her bag, her unfinished notes. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees. Anthony's presence still lingered in the room, not physically, but emotionally. Power carried weight even after it left. She remembered how he looked at her apartment, not judging, studying, like someone discovering a language they never learned. Ivy prepared for school slowly. No rush, no audience, just her. At campus, whispers returned. Some students admired her connection. Some resented it. Some wanted it. But Ivy didn't feel powerful. She felt exposed. During class, her professor spoke about leadership. Leadership, he said, is knowing who you are when nobody applauds. Ivy's pen paused. She thought of Anthony, how applause followed him everywhere, yet loneliness sat beside him constantly. After lectures, Ivy walked alone across campus paths. Leaves rustled, wind whispered, and for the first time, Ivy realized something painful. Being near power doesn't protect you from pain, it only magnifies it. Her phone vibrated. A message from Anthony. Did you get to class safely? She stared, then smiled, and typed back, yes, thank you for asking. 3 seconds later, have a calm day. She read the words twice, because calm didn't exist in Anthony's world, yet he was offering it to her. Chloe stood inside her luxury apartment staring at her mirror, not fixing makeup, fixing pride. The gala humiliation replayed in her head. Anthony taking Ivy's hand. Anthony choosing public defense. Anthony choosing someone else. Chloe slammed her perfume bottle down. I built him, she whispered angrily. She remembered helping Anthony's mother arrange meetings, protecting his image, covering scandals. And now Ivy stood where Chloe believed she belonged. Her phone rang. Lucas. She hesitated, then answered. Lucas. His voice was soft. You okay? Chloe scoffed. Why wouldn't I be? Lucas paused. Because you don't sound like someone who's winning. Silence. Then Chloe laughed bitterly. You always say stupid things. Lucas replied calmly. Maybe, but I notice real ones. Chloe closed her eyes. For a second, her mask slipped. Just a second. Anthony is changing, she whispered. Lucas answered gently. People change when they stop running. Chloe opened her eyes, and suddenly, she realized something terrifying. Anthony wasn't running anymore, and neither was Ivy. Power doesn't collapse loudly, it cracks quietly, and Chloe could hear the sound. Power never stays private for long. By morning, Anthony's name floated across business blogs, social pages, whispered investor channels, not because of stocks, not because of mergers, but because of Ivy. Who is the mystery woman beside Madison? CEO seen leaving gala early with unknown companion. New romance? Anthony read none of it, but Lucas did. He sat in his office, scrolling slowly, jaw tightening. They weren't attacking Anthony. They were dissecting Ivy. Her past job leaked. Her student records surfaced. Photos from the restaurant appeared. Lucas stood up. This is Chloe, he muttered. He stormed into Anthony's office without knocking. Anthony looked up. What? Lucas threw his tablet on the desk. They're dragging her. Anthony's eyes moved fast across the screen. Each word sharpened his expression. She didn't ask for this, Lucas added. Anthony's jaw flexed. Neither did I. Lucas hesitated. Then quietly, Chloe's been feeding them. The room froze. Anthony stood slowly. Prove it. Lucas swallowed. I already did. He slid emails across the desk. Anonymous, strategic, cruel. Anthony exhaled through his nose. Not anger yet. Something deeper. Disappointment. Protect Ivy, Anthony said calmly. Lucas nodded. Already doing it. Because sometimes loyalty stops being business and starts becoming moral. Anthony arrived at Ivy's apartment that evening without warning. Not rushed, not commanding. Careful. Ivy opened the door wearing loose clothes, curls falling naturally. Is something wrong? Anthony paused. My mother wants to meet you. Silence sat between them. Ivy blinked. That's not in the contract. Anthony didn't deny it. I know. She stepped back slightly. I'm not auditioning for your family. Anthony softened his voice. She's curious and stubborn. Ivy crossed her arms. I don't belong there. Anthony studied her. You belong wherever you stand honestly. She shook her head. Anthony, I'm already being watched. I don't want to be judged too. He exhaled slowly. She already knows about you. Pause. And Chloe. That name made Ivy still. Anthony added quietly. She's confused. Ivy met his eyes. So am I. Minutes passed. Then Ivy whispered. Fine. Not brave. Not confident. Just willing. Sometimes courage is simply showing up scared. Anthony's mother lived in calm wealth. Not flashy. Not loud. Elegant silence. The house smelled like tea and old books. Ivy walked in slowly, heart beating carefully. Anthony's mother watched her. Not hostile. Assessing. So you're Ivy, she said softly. Yes, ma'am. They sat. Tea poured. Silence brewed. Then questions began. Where are your parents? My mother passed. My father works abroad. What do you study? Hospitality management. Why hospitality? Because I believe service teaches humility. Anthony's mother paused. She leaned back slightly. And humility survives in Anthony's world? Ivy answered honestly. It struggles. The woman smiled faintly. Good answer. Then her tone changed. Do you love my son? Ivy froze. Anthony stiffened. Mom. But Ivy lifted her hand gently. I don't know yet, she said truthfully. I respect him. I fear him sometimes. And I'm learning him. Anthony's mother studied her deeply, then nodded slowly. Better than pretending. But the room shifted when Chloe arrived. Eyes red, steps shaking. She rushed toward Anthony's mother. Mama Madison. She knelt beside her chair. I've been loyal for years. Tears spilled. I protected Anthony. I stayed. Anthony's mother touched Chloe's face gently. Child, loyalty doesn't guarantee love. Chloe sobbed harder. I only wanted to belong. The room fell silent. Anthony watched. Ivy watched. And suddenly the difference between ambition and affection became painfully visible. Chloe's crying echoed softly against the walls. Anthony's mother sighed. Anthony, say something. He stood, slowly, not angry, not defensive, honest. Chloe, he said quietly, I respect your work. Pause. But I never promised my heart. Chloe looked up. You led me. Anthony shook his head. I never held your hand. You held my shadow. Silence cracked. Anthony turned to his mother. Ivy didn't force herself into my life. Pause. She walked in when I stopped locking the door. His mother stared, then smiled faintly. So this girl annoys you? Anthony nodded. Constantly. She smiled wider. Good, because annoyance is often affection pretending not to care. Chloe stood slowly, pride wounded, eyes cold again. She looked at Ivy. You won't survive his world. Ivy answered calmly. I'm not trying to own it. I'm trying to stand in it. Anthony's mother closed her eyes briefly, then said softly, That's enough for today. And just like that, the room chose peace over rivalry. Later that night, Anthony drove Ivy home quietly. No music, no speeches, just road and reflection. At a red light, Ivy whispered, Your mother scares me. Anthony smiled faintly. She scares billionaires too. Ivy laughed softly, then stopped. Anthony, why are you doing this? He stared ahead. Because contracts expire. Pause. But people stay. She turned to him. You're changing. He nodded. So are you. The city lights blurred past. Not rich, not poor, just human. And for the first time, Anthony Madison wasn't driving power. He was driving possibility. The car stopped in front of Ivy's apartment building. Not the kind that impressed billionaires. Not the kind that appeared in magazines. Just quiet concrete holding real lives. Anthony didn't move immediately. Neither did Ivy. Streetlights spilled gold across the dashboard, touching Anthony's jaw, touching Ivy's curls. I didn't plan tonight, Ivy whispered. Anthony exhaled. My life is usually planned by the minute. Pause. And yet you keep disrupting it. She smiled faintly. Sorry. He looked at her. Don't be. She opened the door, then paused. Your world feels heavy. Anthony answered honestly. It is. She nodded slowly. And lonely. That word landed harder than expected. Anthony didn't respond, because sometimes truth doesn't need defense. Ivy stepped out, but before closing the door, she looked back. Good night, Anthony Madison. His lips curved. Good night, Ivy Winchester. And when the car pulled away, Ivy realized something dangerous had happened. She no longer felt like a visitor in his life. She felt invited. Power usually slept beside Anthony. Deadlines, markets, boards. But that night, sleep avoided him. He stood by his glass window, city breathing below. He replayed Ivy's voice, her honesty, her hesitation, her courage without armor, not polished like Chloe, not strategic like investors, just real. Anthony poured whiskey, didn't drink. He remembered how Ivy had said, I'm not trying to own your world. That sentence stayed, because everyone else always tried to own him. Anthony sat slowly on the couch. For the first time in years, he asked himself something unfamiliar. What happens when the contract ends? Silence answered, and silence scared powerful men more than enemies ever could. Morning arrived with files and coffee. Lucas walked into Anthony's office like usual, but stopped. Anthony was staring at nothing. Lucas raised a brow. You look like a poet, not a CEO. Anthony glanced at him. Get out. Lucas laughed. Nope, something happened. Anthony stood. Nothing said. Lucas leaned on the desk. It's Ivy. Silence. Lucas smiled knowingly. You're distracted. Anthony scoffed. I don't do distraction. Lucas shrugged. You do now. He paused. Chloe noticed too. Anthony's jaw flexed. I don't care. Lucas tilted his head. You will when she starts acting desperate. Anthony finally looked up. What do you mean? Lucas crossed his arms. She doesn't love you. Pause. She loves control. Anthony absorbed that quietly, because control was once his own religion, and Ivy had unknowingly shaken it. Chloe sat alone in her office later that afternoon, not crying, thinking. She watched Anthony through glass walls. He smiled, barely, but it wasn't business. It was human, and Chloe hated human on him. She clenched her phone, opened Ivy's social profile, scrolled slowly. Not rich, not powerful, not elite, just warm. Chloe whispered to herself, she doesn't belong there. But the truth hurt differently. Belonging wasn't chosen by wealth, it was chosen by presence. And Ivy's presence was slowly rewriting Anthony's habits. Chloe stood, decision forming. If power couldn't keep him, then emotion would try. Back in her apartment, Ivy removed her heels slowly, not tired, thoughtful. She sat on her bed and stared at her reflection. Same curls, same eyes, but something inside had shifted. She remembered Anthony's calm voice, his quiet protection, his unspoken loneliness. Ivy whispered, this was supposed to be fake, yet nothing about tonight felt staged. She lay back slowly. For the first time since the contract began, she didn't feel like a project. She felt like a partner in something undefined. And uncertainty suddenly felt beautiful instead of dangerous. Time never waited for feelings to organize themselves. It moved, and before Ivy could understand what she had become inside Anthony's world, 3 months had already slipped past them. 3 months of shared cars, 3 months of quiet breakfasts, 3 months of pretending nothing real was happening while everything real was. Anthony no longer checked the time before calling Ivy. Ivy no longer felt like a visitor in his penthouse. They learned each other in silence. How Anthony removed his watch when stressed. How Ivy hummed when nervous. How neither of them admitted attachment, yet both behaved like it already lived there. One morning, Anthony stood by the window while Ivy sipped tea behind him. The city glowed. His voice broke the calm. My mother wants a wedding. The words dropped heavy. Ivy froze. What? Anthony turned slowly. It wasn't my idea. He exhaled. She thinks stability will protect my image. Ivy laughed lightly at first, then stopped. Protect you from what? Anthony didn't answer immediately. From rumors, from investors, from questions. Ivy stood, and from the truth. The room grew quiet. Anthony stepped closer. She wants us married. Ivy's breath changed. Not excited. Afraid? Anthony, we're not supposed to become permanent. He watched her carefully. She whispered, what happens when the contract ends? Silence. She continued, no one marries a temporary woman. Anthony's jaw tightened. This isn't business anymore. Ivy shook her head. To you maybe. To me it still is. Her voice cracked. When it's over, you return to your world, and I return to explaining why I almost touched yours. Anthony had no reply ready, because she wasn't wrong. Love didn't scare Anthony. Exposure did. Within weeks, investors noticed changes. Anthony left meetings early, declined dinners, appeared softer in public, and powerful people never trusted softness. During a board meeting, an older investor leaned forward. So, Mr. Madison, rumors say you're settling down. Anthony crossed his arms. Rumors are lazy. Another investor smiled thinly. Stability attracts markets. Anthony responded calmly. Performance attracts markets. But Ivy felt the pressure differently. At business dinners, wives examined her. Executives questioned her education. Bankers smiled like they were calculating risk. One woman whispered beside Ivy, are you permanent? Ivy forced a smile. I'm present. But presence wasn't enough for elite rooms. They wanted ownership. That night, Ivy told Anthony, they're not watching us. They're evaluating me. Anthony replied quietly, they evaluate everyone. She shook her head. No, they measure me. Anthony finally understood. Power never shared space. It tested it. Lucas found Chloe at the rooftop bar late that night, not crying, drinking, He walked closer. You always hide here. Chloe didn't look at him. It's quiet. Lucas leaned beside her. Quiet doesn't heal obsession. She smirked. You think I'm obsessed? Lucas sighed. You think you're hopeful. She laughed softly. Anthony belongs to a world I understand. Lucas turned toward her. And I don't? She finally faced him. You belong to comfort. Lucas smiled bitterly. And Anthony belongs to fantasy? Chloe's voice lowered. He belongs to ambition. Lucas studied her. You don't love him. She scoffed. I love what he represents. Lucas nodded slowly. That's the problem. He paused. I love you. Chloe froze, not surprised, annoyed. She stood. Lucas, don't reduce yourself like that. He looked hurt. I'm not reducing myself. I'm offering stability. Chloe shook her head. I don't settle for men who watch dreams. I settle for men who build them. And she walked away, leaving Lucas staring at a woman who wanted power more than peace. Anthony brought the wedding conversation back a week later, not aggressive, careful. They sat in silence. He finally said, My mother already booked a planner. Ivy blinked. You didn't even ask me, Anthony replied. I'm asking now. She stood slowly. No. The word shocked the room. Anthony looked up. No? Ivy's hands trembled. I refuse to marry borrowed affection. Anthony rose. This isn't borrowed. She looked into his eyes. Then define it. Silence. She continued softly. When the contract ends, you won't choose me. Your world will choose for you. Anthony frowned. You're assuming. She smiled sadly. I'm protecting myself. Tears gathered. I didn't grow up dreaming of temporary love dressed as forever. Anthony stepped closer. Ivy. She backed away. Don't turn convenience into commitment. Anthony froze, because that sentence exposed everything he was still afraid to admit, and Ivy walked away carrying fear disguised as strength. For 2 days, Ivy avoided Anthony, not because she hated him, but because every corner of the penthouse carried questions she wasn't ready to answer. Anthony noticed the silence. He hated silence more than arguments. On the 3rd evening, he found her on the balcony, wrapped in a light cardigan, staring at the city like it owed her something. I thought you left, he said calmly. Ivy didn't turn. I thought about what you said. Anthony walked closer. And, she inhaled slowly, if I agree, it won't be free. Anthony frowned slightly. Meaning? She finally faced him. I want compensation. The word hit wrong. Anthony's brows pulled together. How much? Ivy hesitated, then spoke carefully. $10 million. The night went quiet. Anthony stared at her. 10 million? She nodded, not proud, not smiling. I'm not marrying fantasy. I'm securing survival. Anthony crossed his arms. So this is business to you. Ivy swallowed. Everything in your world is. Anthony exhaled sharply. Fine. He pulled out his phone. I'll transfer it. Her eyes widened. You're not even asking why. Anthony's jaw tightened. Because the answer won't change the contract. Ivy's heart sank. Because she needed the money. Not for herself, but for her father. Her father whose engineering visa had stalled. Her father whose dreams of working abroad were dying quietly. She wanted to save him, but she didn't say it, and Anthony didn't ask. So the silence misunderstood them both. He thought she stayed for money. She stayed for family. And neither of them spoke the truth. The transfer came in before sunrise. $10 million. Ivy stared at the notification like it burned her screen. She didn't smile. She sat on the bed and cried quietly instead. Money didn't feel like victory. It felt like a wall between her and honesty. Meanwhile, Anthony watched her differently now. Colder, measured. When she laughed, he wondered if it was professional. When she touched his arm, he wondered if it was practiced. Lucas noticed first. You're quieter, Anthony answered flatly. She's transactional. Lucas blinked. What? She named her price. Lucas raised his brow. Did you ask her reason? Anthony paused. No. Lucas sighed. Then you bought a story without reading the chapters. Anthony didn't respond, because men like him preferred control over curiosity, and Ivy preferred sacrifice over explanation. So misunderstanding built walls where affection once tried to grow. Anthony's mother didn't waste time. The word wedding traveled faster than emotion. Designers arrived, planners called, florists measured spaces, media sniffed quietly. Ivy felt swallowed by silk, numbers, and schedules. One planner smiled too much. Miss Winchester, do you prefer royal elegance or modern luxury? Ivy hesitated. I prefer peace. They laughed politely, but no one designed peace. Anthony stayed professional through everything. He approved venues, budgets, security, but never looked at Ivy the way he once did. Now he looked like a CEO managing a merger, and Ivy felt it. She tried to speak once. Anthony, he replied without looking up. Send your measurements to the stylist. Her words fell unfinished. The wedding grew bigger than feelings and smaller than truth. That night, Ivy stood before the mirror holding a ring sample, not sparkling, heavy. She whispered to her reflection, "You're not marrying love, you're financing destiny." Anthony entered quietly behind her. "You agreed." She nodded. "I did." He studied her through the mirror. "You wanted money." Her heart clenched. "Yes." He looked away. "Then we're clear." Clear. The word cut deeper than rejection. Ivy turned toward him. "We're clear on paper, not in hearts." Anthony replied coldly. "Hearts complicate business." She smiled sadly. "And business complicates hearts." Neither moved closer, yet the wedding clock had already started ticking, and destiny was no longer asking permission. The next morning, Ivy woke up to voices, not gentle ones, stylists, designers, assistants. They filled the penthouse like a controlled storm. Fabrics were lifted in the air. Jewels clinked. Shoes lined the marble floor like soldiers waiting for inspection. One woman smiled brightly. "Miss Winchester, today we begin your transformation." Transformation. Ivy sat quietly as they touched her hair, her skin, her posture. They taught her how to stand, how to smile, how to enter a room like money lived inside her bones. But inside, Ivy felt smaller than ever. She glanced across the room. Anthony stood by the window on a call. "Yes, make sure the guest list includes the investors from Zurich." Pause. "No mistakes." He ended the call and finally looked at her. Their eyes met for half a second. Then he looked away. That was when Ivy understood something painful. She wasn't being prepared for marriage. She was being prepared for presentation, a product for a powerful world. And no one asked how her heart was adjusting to the packaging. That evening, the penthouse felt colder than usual, not because of air conditioning, because words were missing. Ivy prepared tea in the kitchen. Anthony entered quietly. She poured 2 cups without asking. They sat across from each other. The space between them was wider than the table. Anthony broke the silence first. "The venue is booked." Ivy nodded. "Okay." Another pause. "The dress designer arrives tomorrow." "Okay." Anthony exhaled slowly. "You're unusually calm." Ivy lifted her eyes. "Would you prefer panic?" He studied her. "No." She smiled softly. "Then calm is cheaper." Anthony frowned. "You don't sound happy." Ivy answered carefully. "Happiness is loud. Preparation is quiet." He leaned back. "You asked for the money." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Yes." "So why do you look like you lost something?" She looked at him. "Because money solves problems, but it creates distance." Anthony didn't respond. Instead, he stood. "I have meetings." He walked away. Ivy whispered behind him, "So do I." But hers were meetings with fear, uncertainty, and a future she didn't fully recognize anymore. Later that night, Ivy stood alone in the guest room. Boxes of dresses surrounded her. Luxury folded in silence. She picked one up. Silk, cold, beautiful, but it didn't feel like hers. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself breathe out the pain she had been storing. Tears came quietly, not dramatic, honest. She whispered, "Daddy, I hope this is worth it." Her phone vibrated. A message from her father. "My visa interview is next month. I'm nervous but hopeful." Ivy smiled through tears. She typed back, Don't worry, Dad, everything is working out. She placed the phone down. What she didn't send was, I'm trading my peace for your future. And in another room, Anthony stared at the city, wondering why wealth had never felt so heavy. Before, the penthouse had become a controlled chaos. Silk, glass, flowers, and light hung suspended in the air, each corner touched by wealth and precision. Ivy moved carefully, not wanting to ruin a single arrangement. Not because she loved the grandeur, because she feared Anthony's judgment. Each room she passed whispered reminders. She was an outsider here. The florists arranged lilies and orchids in geometrical perfection. Planners measured furniture placement twice before approving. Designers fussed over every fold in the silk drapery. Ivy's reflection in a golden mirror caught her off guard, long curls flowing over her shoulders, eyes tired but resolute, a soft confidence that had grown silently in these months. She paused, held a folded invitation, looked at Anthony's office across the hall. He was there, hands on the desk, eyes scanning spreadsheets, a world built for efficiency. She wondered if he ever looked at her like a person, not a project. And then she shook her head. No, she wasn't allowed to ask. Not allowed, because they both carried secrets heavier than silk and diamonds. The $10 million demand remained between them, unspoken, like a shadow hovering over their interactions. Anthony assumed she only wanted money. Ivy assumed he still didn't fully trust her presence. Neither dared to break the fragile truce. Silence became a language, and the longer it lasted, the more their hearts started translating it into something they both refused to name. Anthony's mother arrived unannounced, not knocking, not asking, just stepping into the controlled chaos as if she owned every square inch, which, in a way, she did. Ivy froze for a heartbeat, not because she feared questions about her past. She had no intention of lying, but because she felt the silent judgment radiating from a woman who had built empires and expected perfection from everyone. Anthony appeared perfectly timed, as though he had known his mother would appear. Mother, he said, crisp and controlled. She waved him off, moving straight into the floral arrangements, nodding at planners, checking budgets, and repositioning tables. She never looked directly at Ivy. She didn't need to. Her expression alone communicated disdain. Ivy's stomach nodded. She moved with precision, following instructions silently. Every decision she made was careful, polite, yet firm. Anthony observed quietly, not intervening, not explaining. For once, he allowed Ivy to navigate without interference. A test, or a trial, or perhaps just his way of watching her survive a world she hadn't chosen. The mother never asked about Ivy's background. She didn't need to. Every action, every hesitation, every misplaced smile spoke volumes in her eyes. Anthony's mother left the way she arrived, quietly commanding, leaving. Ivy, exhausted yet strangely aware of the power dynamics she could never match. And Ivy, standing amid silk and flowers, wondered, was this acceptance or simply tolerance? Days blurred into nights. Planners called repeatedly. Designers adjusted timelines. Caterers measured meals in gold-weighted grams. Anthony sat in the office, silently approving budgets, yet stealing glances at Ivy moving among the chaos. Ivy felt the weight of the unseen contract, not spoken aloud, not known by anyone else. She wondered, did Anthony really understand her motives? Did he see that this was a sacrifice, not ambition? Or did he only see the price she had demanded? The misunderstanding wrapped around them like fog. Anthony's mother came and went. Her silence was louder than any question. It pressed Ivy to excel in every visible detail. It reminded Anthony of the gap between them, perception vs truth. Lucas noticed the tension during lunch at the CEO's private lounge. Madison, you look distracted, he said lightly. Anthony didn't respond. Lucas smirked. It's that girl, isn't it? Anthony stiffened. She's competent, he said carefully. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Come on, you're staring at her like she's a piece of art in a museum. Anthony didn't answer, and Lucas grinned. She's lucky she doesn't know the whispers in your mind. Anthony looked away. The room went quiet, but Lucas's teasing lingered in his thoughts, reminding him that control was no longer complete. Meanwhile, Ivy worked silently, folding silk, adjusting flowers, stepping around expensive glassware, and wondering why her heart beat faster when Anthony wasn't watching, but her mind revolted when it did. Evening came. Anthony and Ivy found themselves alone in the grand hall. No stylists, no planners, no mother, just the two of them, surrounded by unfinished floral arches and half-arranged chairs. Anthony broke the silence. "You agreed." Ivy nodded. "But you think it was only for money." He didn't answer. She continued, her voice low, almost whispering. "You don't know why." Anthony studied her. "I thought I did. I thought your heart wasn't in this." She laughed softly, bitterly. "My heart is complicated. It isn't for your world, not yet. But it's not for sale." Anthony's jaw tightened. Silence. Hours passed, and neither spoke of the $10 million condition that had made the wedding possible. Both knew it. Both felt it. Both pretended it didn't exist. The tension wasn't hatred. It wasn't indifference. It was truth trapped behind pride, fear, and misunderstanding. And in that silence, they realized the wedding would happen, but hearts were still negotiating privately. The morning sunlight spilled into the Madison estate, glinting against polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Ivy arrived, not alone, but with her father, Mr. Winchester, and her only friend, Lydia. Her father had flown in unexpectedly, a quiet man whose life abroad was as meticulous as Anthony's, yet warm in ways the elite world could never measure. Ivy's heart ached as she adjusted her long curls in the mirror. "Relax, Ivy," her father whispered, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've handled everything perfectly. Today is just another day of showing them who you are." Lydia, younger, spirited, and fiercely protective, grinned. "Don't let Madison scare you. He may be rich, but he's not bigger than your courage." Ivy smiled, a fragile shield for the whirlwind about to descend. Anthony was already there, reviewing final arrangements. The guest list, the flowers, the music, every detail reflected power, wealth, and control. He glanced up when Ivy entered. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Neither smiled, neither spoke. The tension thickened the air. Like summer heat before a storm, the bridal gown was laid out across the golden bed. Ivy stepped forward, careful not to touch it until instructed. Lydia gasped, "Wow, it's like it was stitched from moonlight." Her father adjusted her collar softly. "Breathe, Ivy, you deserve this." Ivy touched the fabric. Silk so smooth it seemed unreal. Beads so delicate they whispered of power. Anthony entered, brief glance, and then returned to reviewing seating arrangements. Ivy's heart thumped. She wanted him to notice, but she also feared it. The gown hugged her carefully, accentuating her natural beauty without screaming extravagance. Long curls fell freely over her shoulders. A soft veil framed her face. Lydia fussed around, placing jewelry with precision. "You look like a queen, Ivy, not just a bride." Ivy smiled softly. "I hope today ends without disaster." Her father's hand on her shoulder reminded her silently. "Whatever happens, you're already strong enough." Guests arrived in limousines and private cars. The Madison estate had transformed into a cathedral of wealth. Marble floors reflected designer heels. Crystal chandeliers sparkled under the mid-morning sun. Every whisper carried expectation. Anthony stood at the entrance with his mother beside him. Neither spoke, neither smiled. Ivy, accompanied by her father and Lydia, walked down the hallway like royalty forced to humility. Security cleared paths. Planners guided directions. Every step was measured. Yet Ivy noticed glances from some investors, quiet whispers, questions hidden beneath polite smiles. Anthony observed silently, noting the subtle scrutiny, the fascination. He didn't speak, but his eyes calculated everything. Status, influence, potential threats. Ivy's father whispered to her, "Ignore the eyes. Focus on your heart." Lydia nudged her playfully. "You're stealing the show, Ivy. They'll remember this day long after the flowers wilt." Ivy swallowed her nerves. Her gaze met Anthony's briefly. No warmth, no acknowledgement, just the silent weight of power. In the grand hall, Ivy sat in a private room with her father and Lydia. Minutes before the ceremony, the air was thick with perfume, silk, and anticipation. Ivy whispered, "I feel like I'm walking into a battlefield." Her father placed his hand gently on hers. "You're walking into your life. The battlefield is theirs, not yours." Lydia laughed softly. "Battlefield, life, same thing in this house." Ivy nodded, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Meanwhile, Anthony adjusted his cufflinks in the hall outside. He glanced at his mother, who gave a barely perceptible nod. No words were exchanged, just controlled presence. Inside Ivy's mind, the silent war of misunderstanding raged. The $10 million condition, the misread intentions, the unspoken hearts, all building tension that no one in the room would ever fully understand. Music began. Slow, deliberate, commanding. Ivy stepped forward, each footfall echoing softly across the polished marble. Guests turned, whispers floating through the air like invisible silk threads. Anthony stood at the altar, still stoic, observant, calculating. Ivy's father gave her hand a final squeeze. "Go." She walked with grace, strength, and subtle defiance. Lydia followed quietly behind. Every eye in the hall followed her. Anthony's mother said nothing, her eyes fixed, analyzing Ivy with silent judgment, but she didn't interfere. The ceremony unfolded slowly, each detail meticulous, as if the world had paused to measure every gesture, every look, every silence. And through it all, Ivy and Anthony carried their secret. A love unspoken, a misunderstanding unspoken, a contract unspoken, but their eyes met fleetingly. A spark, a hesitation, a silent acknowledgement of the storm beneath their controlled appearances. The wedding was lavish, elite, and unforgettable, but the real drama was silent, hidden behind glances and controlled gestures. The only ones who knew were Ivy and Anthony themselves. The ceremony ended, but the world didn't stop spinning. Applause echoed across the grand hall. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Music rose, elegant and controlled. Anthony stood beside Ivy as photographers flooded in. Flash, click, pause. Each picture captured a version of them that didn't fully exist yet. Anthony's hand rested lightly at Ivy's waist. Not cold, not warm, careful. Ivy smiled for cameras, but inside, her heart raced. She had crossed into a new world wearing silk and courage. Anthony leaned closer. "Relax," she whispered back. I'm just learning how to breathe in diamonds." He almost smiled. Almost. Across the hall, Lucas stood with a drink in hand, pretending to listen to investors. But his eyes weren't on money. They were on Lydia. She stood beside Ivy's father, laughing softly, her simple elegance contrasting the heavy luxury around her. Lucas noticed it instantly. She didn't belong to the elite crowd, yet she wasn't intimidated either, and that made her interesting. Lucas waited for the right moment, not when she was surrounded, not when cameras were close, but when Lydia stepped away from the crowd toward the balcony, needing air from too much elegance. Lucas followed quietly. The city lights stretched beneath them like scattered stars. He cleared his throat. "Big night." Lydia turned, startled, then relaxed. "It feels like I accidentally walked into a billionaire's movie set." Lucas laughed. "That's accurate." She folded her arms. "You're with the groom." Lucas nodded. "Unfortunately." She smiled. "You say that like he's difficult." Lucas leaned against the railing. "Anthony Madison is allergic to emotion." Lydia laughed softly. "That sounds expensive." He studied her face. "You're Ivy's friend. Only one brave enough to survive her." Lucas smiled. "I'm Lucas." "Lydia." They shook hands. The contact felt brief, but something about it stayed. Lucas hesitated. "So, before the night steals everyone back into their worlds, can I steal your number?" Lydia raised an eyebrow. "Straightforward." Lucas shrugged. "Life's too short for networking without curiosity." She stared at him for a second, then pulled out her phone. "Fine, but don't send business quotes." Lucas grinned. "No promises." Numbers exchanged. Not dramatic, but meaningful. Inside, the music slowed. A soft instrumental filled the hall. The announcer's voice echoed gently. May the couple take the floor. Anthony looked at Ivy. Shall we? She nodded. They walked to the center of the marble dance floor. Hands met. Not familiar, not distant. Learning. Anthony placed one hand at her back. Ivy rested her fingers lightly on his shoulder. The world blurred. Guests watched. Phones recorded. Power admired. But inside the dance, something quiet shifted. Anthony whispered, "You handled today well." Ivy replied softly, "So did you." Silence between steps. Then she asked, "Do you regret it?" Anthony paused, then answered honestly, "I don't regret decisions. I regret misunderstandings." She looked up. "Then maybe one day we'll translate each other better." Anthony met her eyes. For the first time since the contract, he didn't look at her like a responsibility. He looked at her like a question he wanted to understand. And questions were dangerous for men like him. Lydia returned to her seat, phone still warm from Lucas's contact saved inside. She watched Ivy dance, pride glowing quietly in her eyes. Lucas joined her. "You disappeared." She smiled. "Fresh air is cheaper than champagne." He laughed. "So is honesty." She glanced sideways. "Are you always like this?" "Like what?" "Comfortable." Lucas thought for a second. "Only with people who don't pretend." She nodded slowly. The music swelled. Around them, deals were being discussed. Future investments whispered. Luxury celebrated. But between Lucas and Lydia, something lighter formed. Not ambition, not power, curiosity. And curiosity was always the beginning of stories no one planned. As night deepened, guests slowly faded into departures. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter dissolved into distance. Ivy stood beside Anthony near the grand entrance. Her father hugged her tightly. "Remember who you are," she whispered. "I will." Lydia squeezed her hand. "And call me before you forget how normal people live." Ivy laughed softly. "I won't forget." Anthony watched quietly. Something in his chest shifted when he saw how grounded Ivy's world truly was. Not built from money, but loyalty. As the doors closed behind the last guest, silence finally entered the mansion. Anthony turned to Ivy. "Welcome home," she answered quietly. "Let's learn what that means." And somewhere across the city, Lucas stared at Lydia's name glowing on his phone, realizing the wedding hadn't only joined two lives, it had quietly introduced others to new possibilities. The mansion felt quiet after the celebration faded into memory. No music, no guests, no cameras, only the sound of distant city lights breathing outside tall windows. Anthony stood at the entrance of the bridal chamber, one hand resting on the polished door handle, like it might disappear if he touched it too hard. Ivy stood behind him, still in her silk wedding robe, her heart pounding louder than the heels she had taken off moments earlier. Anthony cleared his throat. This is us now." He opened the door slowly. Warm light spilled across velvet curtains, gold-lined mirrors, and a bed that looked too royal for ordinary humans. Ivy inhaled softly. "It looks like a palace." Anthony smiled faintly. "Doesn't feel like one." She looked at him. "Why?" He scratched the back of his head, suddenly not looking like a billionaire CEO, but like a boy trying to speak a new language. "Because palaces are built on control. Tonight feels uncertain." He turned to her. "Ivy, about the contract." She froze slightly. Anthony exhaled. "I don't want it anymore." Her eyes widened. "I want us to quit pretending." Silence filled the room. He continued, voice softer than she'd ever heard. "This is the first time in my life I don't know how to talk. The CEO part of me is scared." Ivy stared, then suddenly laughed. Not mockery, warm surprise. "The mighty Anthony Madison scared?" He sighed. "Don't laugh." She kept smiling. "You look like a timid child learning how to ask for candy." He shook his head. "This is worse than hostile investors." She stepped closer. "You're doing fine." Anthony swallowed, then moved closer too. Slow, careful. He brushed her fingers. "Ivy, how do you feel?" She answered not with words. She rose slightly and kissed him. Soft, uncertain, real. Anthony paused, then kissed her back, deeper, steadier, like a man finally choosing something instead of calculating it. The world outside faded. That night didn't belong to business. It belonged to two strangers deciding to become something more. Morning crept softly through ivory curtains. Sunlight touched Ivy's face like a whisper. She opened her eyes slowly. For a second, she forgot where she was. Then she saw the chandelier, the velvet walls, the man beside her breathing quietly. Reality hit. She sat up quickly. I'm married. Her heart raced. She looked at Anthony sleeping peacefully, something she had never seen before. The powerful CEO finally calm. She smiled nervously. I became a billionaire's wife just like that. She stood, wrapped in a robe, staring at her reflection. Still Ivy, but changed. Anthony stirred. You're awake early. She turned. Do billionaires sleep late? He smirked slightly. Only when life feels safe. She blushed. Days began to pass gently. Breakfast together, late conversations, laughs in the kitchen, quiet walks in the mansion halls. They stopped acting like a contract. They started acting like a home. Anthony learned how Ivy liked her tea. Ivy learned how Anthony secretly loved late-night piano music. Marriage slowly stopped feeling fake. Elsewhere in the city, Lucas and Lydia met quietly. No luxury halls, just cafes, streetlights, hidden smiles. They laughed too much, touched hands too often. One evening, Lydia leaned against his car. This is officially a secret relationship. Lucas grinned. Best kind, she teased, until someone gets jealous. He didn't know how true that was. Back at the company, Chloe watched Lucas from afar. He no longer sat near her, no longer teased her, no longer looked twice. She felt invisible. She approached him one afternoon. Lucas, did I do something wrong? He barely looked up. No. Then why do you treat me like air now? Lucas sighed. Because air is easy to breathe when your heart is somewhere else. Her chest tightened. Somewhere else? He stood. Don't wait for people who already walked away. He left her frozen. And hurt people never stay quiet for long. One afternoon, Chloe entered Anthony's office unexpectedly. The room was empty, silent. She walked closer to his desk. A file sat slightly open. Curiosity whispered. She touched it, pulled it out, then froze. Her eyes scanned the pages. Marriage agreement. Contract duration. Her hands trembled. It was fake. Shock turned into rage. Tears welled. They played me. She flipped pages quickly. Evidence. Dates. Signatures. Power. Her lips curved into a painful smile. If I can't belong in their world, I'll burn it. She took photos, saved them, and that evening, the truth exploded. Blogs, media, investors, screens, billionaire CEO's marriage exposed as contractual lie. Phones rang, stocks trembled. Anthony's office doors burst open. Ivy stared at the screen in disbelief. Anthony clenched his fist. The past had returned to challenge the future, and love suddenly stood under pressure. Anthony stood before the glass window, city trembling beneath him. Ivy whispered behind him, "Is this because of me?" He turned slowly. No, then softer. "It's because the world hates love that wasn't planned." She walked closer. "Do you regret choosing me?" He looked into her eyes. Long, serious. No. Outside, chaos grew. Inside, something fragile fought to survive. And this time, Anthony Madison wasn't ready to walk away. By morning, the Madison empire was no longer silent. Phones rang like alarms. News channels replayed the headline every hour. Blogs argued. Investors panicked. Madison CEO's wedding revealed as contractual lie. Anthony sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast in front of him. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dark. Across from him, Ivy scrolled through her phone, hands shaking slightly. Comments flooded in. She married for money. She's a paid actress. He bought a wife. Ivy's breath hitched. She locked the phone and stood. I shouldn't have agreed to this. Anthony looked up. What? She swallowed. Your life was peaceful before me. He stood slowly. My life was empty before you. She stared. This is destroying your company. He stepped closer. I built the company. I won't let gossip destroy my marriage. Her eyes softened, but fear still lived there. Outside the mansion gates, reporters already gathered like birds waiting for weakness. At Madison Corporation, the boardroom felt colder than usual. Executives filled the long table. Lawyers whispered. Investors frowned. Anthony entered calmly. Every eye turned. A man slammed his palm. Was the marriage fake, Mr. Madison? Silence. Anthony adjusted his cufflinks. It started as a misunderstanding. Murmurs rose. He continued, but it ended as a choice. Another investor scoffed. You paid $10 million for love? Anthony's eyes sharpened. No, I chose a woman before the world chose chaos. The room buzzed. You risk stocks for romance? Anthony leaned forward. I built Madison Empire by risk. I won't abandon my wife because fear learned how to tweet. The room fell quiet. Some respected it. Some hated it. Business and love had finally collided. Back at the mansion, Ivy locked herself in the bathroom. Water ran, but tears ran faster. She leaned against the marble sink. I didn't ask for this world. She stared at her reflection. Still Ivy Winchester. Still a girl who once washed dishes for survival, now wearing diamonds heavy with pressure. Her chest hurt. Anthony knocked softly. Ivy. No answer. I know you're scared. The door unlocked slowly. She opened it. What if they're right? He cupped her face. Right about what? That I don't belong. He shook his head. You don't belong to my company. You belong to me. Her tears slowed. He pulled her into his arms. And for the first time since the scandal, Ivy felt safe again. Chloe sat alone in her apartment, phone glowing with chaos she created. News channels replayed her leaked evidence. But instead of victory, she felt hollow. Her hands trembled. Lucas' words echoed. Don't wait for people who already walked away. She whispered. I just wanted to be chosen. Her phone buzzed. Anthony's mother called. Chloe froze before answering. Yes, ma'am. Her voice broke. I didn't mean for things to explode like this. The line stayed silent. Then softly, jealousy always explodes louder than truth. The call ended, and Chloe finally realized she didn't destroy Ivy. She destroyed herself. Lucas stood in Anthony's office later that night, arms folded. You're not losing her. Anthony looked up. Investors might leave. Lucas shrugged. Let them. You didn't marry stocks. Anthony smirked faintly. And Chloe? Lucas sighed. She crossed a line. Then quieter. I already crossed into someone else's heart. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Lydia. Lucas smiled. Exactly. For the first time in days, Anthony felt something stable again. Friendship. Few days later, Ivy walked into Anthony's office without fear. He turned. She stood straight. No more hiding. Anthony blinked. What? She exhaled. I married you. Not the headlines. She walked closer. If the world questions me, I'll answer. His eyes softened. You're sure? She nodded. I used to beg for jobs. Now I won't beg for respect. Anthony smiled, proud, calm, steady. And for the first time, Ivy Winchester looked like a Madison, not by wealth, but by courage. Cameras flashed endlessly. Anthony and Ivy stood together on stage. Reporters shouted. Was the marriage purchased? Anthony reached for Ivy's hand. She squeezed back. He spoke first. My wife was never for sale. Gasps filled the room. Ivy stepped forward. I was a waitress, a student, a woman with nothing but courage. She paused. I didn't marry money. I married a man who learned how to love. Silence followed. Then applause. Not from everyone, but from those who understood hearts before numbers. That night, the mansion felt peaceful again. Anthony poured wine. Ivy sat beside him. We survived. He smiled. We chose. She leaned on his shoulder. From waitress to wife. He kissed her forehead. From lonely CEO to husband. Outside, the city breathed slowly, and love finally felt stronger than scandal. Morning arrived differently in the Madison mansion. Not with alarms. Not with business calls. Not with fear, but with silence, the good kind. Soft sunlight spilled through the tall glass walls, brushing over silk curtains, golden furniture, and the wide room that once felt empty but now breathed like a home. Ivy stood by the window, barefoot on the cold marble floor, her long hair falling freely down her back. She held a cup of tea but hadn't taken a sip. For the first time in her life, peace felt strange. Behind her, Anthony watched quietly. The same man who once measured life in minutes, contracts, and numbers now measured it in breaths, smiles, and the way Ivy leaned slightly when she thought too hard. He walked over slowly. "You're awake early." She smiled faintly. "I couldn't sleep." He raised a brow. "Nightmares?" She shook her head. "No, thoughts." He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "Good ones?" She hesitated. "Different ones." Anthony rested his chin on her shoulder. Before Ivy, mornings meant rushing to work, surviving, begging time not to defeat her. Now mornings meant belonging, and she was still learning how to breathe inside it. Later that day, Ivy walked through Madison Corporation differently, not as a visitor, not as a rumor, not as a contract, but as Mrs. Madison. Staff bowed lightly. Secretaries smiled nervously. Executives whispered. Yet Ivy didn't lift her nose. She lifted her heart. She stopped to greet the cleaners, thanked the guards, smiled at interns who once stared at her online. Anthony watched her from his office glass wall. Lucas leaned beside him, arms crossed. "She's changing your empire." Anthony smirked. "She already changed me." Ivy entered the office. Lucas bowed jokingly. "Morning, First Lady of Madison." She laughed softly. "Please don't start." Lucas chuckled. "You look different." She blinked. "How?" "Like someone who doesn't fear tomorrow anymore." Anthony's eyes softened at that, and Ivy realized something quietly. She didn't just marry into wealth, she married into purpose. Across the city, Chloe packed her apartment alone. No music, no mirrors, no pride, just boxes. She held her phone, scrolling through old photos, company dinners, events, smiles that once meant something, but nothing looked real anymore. She whispered to herself, "I waited too long." Lucas had moved on, Anthony had chosen, and Chloe had finally learned. Love never waits for entitlement. She left a letter at Anthony's office reception. Not long, just, hopefully. "You don't regret your action too late. If you ever do, you know where to find me. I would be waiting for you, my sweet waitress boy." She boarded a flight that night to New York, not defeated, but released. At a quiet cafe, Lydia sat across from Lucas, fingers wrapped around warm coffee. Lucas smiled at her. "You're quiet today." She shrugged. "Just thinking. About us." Lucas leaned closer. "I like the sound of that." She smiled. "For once, I'm not second choice." Lucas reached for her hand. "You're my first piece." The city outside moved fast, but their world slowed gently. While Anthony found love through storms, Lucas found it through calm. That night, Anthony and Ivy sat on the mansion balcony again. Wind played with curtains. Stars hung quietly. Anthony stared into the city lights. "I used to think love was a distraction." Ivy tilted her head. "And now," he exhaled, "now I know its direction." She smiled. "You sound poetic." He laughed softly. "Don't tell the board." He turned serious. "Ivy, thank you for surviving me." She blinked. "For what?" "For my anger, my pride, my fear." She held his face. "You survived yourself." Anthony kissed her palm gently. And the CEO who once feared closeness now feared losing nothing more than her. Weeks later, Ivy stood in the bathroom quietly. The mansion was asleep. The city was distant. Her hands trembled slightly. She stared at the small test in her palm. 2 lines. Clear. Soft. powerful. Her breath caught. She sat on the marble edge, heart racing not with fear but wonder. Anthony knocked gently. Ivy? She opened the door slowly. He noticed her eyes first. What's wrong? She swallowed. Anthony. She placed the test into his hand. He stared at it. Once, twice, then froze. You mean? Her voice shook softly. We're not just a couple anymore. Anthony's knees almost weakened. His voice lowered. You're saying, I'm going to be a father? Ivy nodded. For a moment, the powerful CEO said nothing. Then his eyes filled. He pulled her into his arms tightly. Not the hug of a businessman, but the embrace of a man whose world just grew larger than money. He whispered, I used to build companies. His voice cracked. Now I build a family. Ivy smiled against his chest. And in the quiet mansion, a new Madison life began. Not in wealth, but in love.
They said love belongs to the rich. Survival belongs to the poor. But the truth is that love doesn't ask for status, but it only asks for courage. And when two worlds collide, the strongest empire is not money. It is the heart that refuses to give up. This is where power ends and real love begins. This is Elite Divide, where power meets passion.